The dog was named Crow, christened not with ceremony but instinct, for the cold dark streak that ran from the ridge of his snout to the base of his spine, like soot smeared across snow. He didn't bark unless it mattered. He'd outlasted 2 cattle drives, 3 gunfights, and 1 Kansas winter that split barn walls like cracked ribs. Wade Cridge trusted Crow more than any man he'd ridden beside since the war, and maybe more than he trusted himself. They were 30 miles from the fringes of Sundown County when the wind began to shift, blowing in from the west with a scent Wade couldn't place. But Crow did. The dog's ears flicked, his head turned sharply into the breeze. Wade, sun-scorched and saddle-worn, paused mid-swig from his canteen. Crow had stopped moving. He never broke gait unless something was wrong. The dog loped ahead, slicing through cactus shade and cracked earth. Wade clicked his tongue and nudged the mare forward, following him at a careful pace. They passed a rust-bitten fence post, long divorced from any working ranch. A sun-bleached skull tangled in barbed wire. A boot half swallowed by sand. This was a land made of memory's bones, the discarded and the dead. Then Crow halted. Wade dismounted with the slow caution of a man who knew the ground itself might betray him. His boots sank into dust that still clung to morning's chill, though the sun was already cruel. Crow gave a low whine. She was curled beneath the fractured shadow of a boulder, partially buried in the earth, as if she tried to return to it. Her skin had the color of wet ash, her lips cracked and bleeding, her hair a tangled snarl of dried blood and dust. What remained of her dress, once sky blue, had been shredded by wind and thorns. The hem torn to ribbons like a wolf had breathed through it. Wade didn't speak. He dropped to a crouch beside her, laying the back of his hand near her mouth. A whisper of breath touched his skin, paper dry. But there, alive, barely. Crow sat back on his haunches, unblinking. Wade brought water to her lips. She swallowed once, then convulsed, coughing up dust. Her eyes fluttered but didn't open. She tried to move and failed. Her limbs hung loose, her body nothing but skin and shadow. He lifted her gently and tied her to the saddle, her arms like slack rope. Then he climbed up behind her, guiding the mare toward the far-off foothills where an old hunting shack lay half-hidden behind a stand of cottonwoods, a place Wade hadn't seen since spring rains carved holes in the roof. It was no palace, but better than leaving her for buzzards and the silence. She was nearly weightless. A girl carved hollow by something far too big for her bones. Crow ran ahead, leading the way like he knew she belonged to something sacred. Something worth finding. He said it, but she didn't answer. The air inside reeked of mildew and old ink. Dust floated like unsettled spirits. Ruth moved across the courtroom's ledger desk, prying open drawers until she found the deeds. She knew exactly what she was looking for. "Here," she said, holding up a yellowed, folded page. The paper was stained with age, but the name rang fresh. Jameson Vexley Matthias Templeton Buyer. Transferred 6 months after my disappearance. Sealed with an emblem Wade recognized, an old family crest burned from the war. Thought extinct. She turned the page. In a margin penned in foreign script, "Property cleared, he deceased." Ruth stared until her knuckles paled. Then she tore the page in half. They didn't sleep. Instead, they pursued the paper trail across the town. One name led to the next: bank manager, land broker, church official. In St. Ellison, that deal lay buried beneath smiles and scripture. By dawn, Wade had 2 names in his notebook: Templeton and Clive Doran. One rich, one deadly. Templeton owned the land now. Doran had facilitated exchange and ran the guards who kept women like Ruth in wagons, in camps, in silence. They found the brothel by scent before ever seeing it. Perfume heavy, pipe smoke hanging thick, flesh too soft for frontier cold. A girl no more than 15 answered the door. "I'm looking for Clive," Ruth said. "He doesn't receive visitors." The girl replied, "Tell him it's Vexley's daughter." The girl blinked once, then disappeared inside. Wade stayed silent, placing a hand on Ruth's shoulder. She shook it off. 5 minutes later, Clive Doran emerged. Tall, smile too bright, boots too clean. His eyes measured her like livestock. "Vexley's daughter," he said slowly. "I didn't expect to see you standing." She didn't flinch. You were meant to disappear, he added. A quiet loss. Regrettable but useful. I remember your hands, she said. I remember the ring iron crest. The way you held the gate open when they dragged me out. Doran chuckled. Memories. Funny things. Crow growled low. Doran reached for his belt. Wade fired first, clipping his wrist. The pistol clattered to dirt. Doran roared. Ruth stepped forward, slammed her Colt into his knee. He crumpled. She knelt beside him. You'll take me to Templeton. Now. The mansion stood west of the tracks on high ground, long windows surveying the town sins. They dragged Doran through unseen gates up the walk. The butler opened the door and turned pale. Tell him, Ruth said to Doran. He hissed through clenched teeth. She's here. Moments later, the door swung wide. Matthias Templeton stood framed, a velvet coat, the same seal on his collar as a notary page. His hair was white, his eyes hollow. You were a child, he said, as though business could excuse horror. I'm not a child now, Ruth replied. You sold her family's land. You signed her death warrant. Templeton glanced past him, at Crow at the gun, at her eyes burning in that silent fury. I can't undo it, he murmured. No, Ruth said, but you can pay. She raised a Colt. Templeton didn't flinch. If I'd known what you'd become, he sneered, I'd have killed you myself. She shot him through the eye. Doran cried again. Wade hit him across the jaw with his rifle, but the butler fled. Crow barked once. Flames bloomed behind them as they left the mansion burning. Back on the edge of town, Ruth sat beneath sycamores, gun across her lap, face streaked with soot. Wade stood guard by the road. You could leave now, she said. Return to the land. He shook his head. She looked at him, truly looked, and whispered, I think you were meant to find me. Crow found you. They sat in silence until dusk, then rode north, back to the hills, back to dirt that hadn't been stolen. The war wasn't over, but the ghosts grew fewer as spring returned on dust and thunder. Rain carved gullies into their trail, red as accusation. Ruth rode through it like inhabiting the bones of the world, not its fragile skin. They camped in the ruins of a burned chapel. Walls blackened, crucifix split in two, pews torn up long ago for wood. Wade sparked a fire anyway. Crow curled beneath the altar like it was home. Ruth knelt before the pulpit, tracing names and prayers etched in stone by forgotten souls. You ever believe in God? She asked Wade over the crackle of burning logs. When I was a boy, he said, until I learned what men did in his name. She nodded as though expecting that answer. I used to pray, she continued, in the camp before the words slipped away. Silence stretched between them. Do you believe in justice? She broke it. I believe in consequence, he answered. Ruth stood. Then we'll go to Stonewater next. Why there? Wade asked. It's where the other girl went. Wade frowned. What child? Her breath trembled. The night I was dragged, that first night, there was another girl, younger, maybe 7. They said she'd fetch more coin. They stuffed a rag in her mouth. Ruth's gaze hardened. I left her behind. Stonewater lay 5 days northeast. Once a mining boom town, now choked with poverty and black lung. Company guards outnumbered miners 3-1. Justice didn't stand there. But Ruth wasn't seeking permission. She dressed tight in Wade's old coat, gun loose at her side. Wade wrapped his rifle in canvas. Finger curled near the trigger. Crow prowled ahead, hackles raised at every lingering stare. They found the girl, Elsie, hunched in the shack behind the collapsed mill. 11 now, wire-thin, eyes ancient with grief. She stitched a sackcloth doll with fingers nearly invisible. When Ruth stepped inside, Elsie flinched. I remember you, Ruth said. You had a yellow ribbon. Elsie blinked once. They took it. I know. Ruth's voice was low. Are you here to take me back? No, Ruth knelt beside her. I'm here to burn it all down. They unearthed her fate. She was sold to a mine owner named Cyrus Hobb, a brick house over a town of rot. Guards bought by the wagon load. Wade wanted to kill him outright. Ruth had other plans. She spent the night gathering names. Union men who remembered fires. Miners who lost daughters, sisters, wives. She poured whiskey and asked the questions no one dared voice. By dawn, she had 20 names. By dusk, 20 men with pickaxes, knives, rifles, all thirsting for justice. Ruth called them to mind just after midnight. When guards change shifts, dogs are fed. She didn't promise safety. She promised reckoning. The night burned blue with silence and rage. No shouting, no chaos, just men remembering what they'd lost. Wade took the south door. Ruth and Crow circled the stables. A miner climbed the roof with a torch and oil. The first guard died before he could draw a breath. The second slumped inside. Hob fled, half down the stairwell. Ruth found him. She didn't speak. She leveled the Colt. He pleaded. She whispered, "Do you know how many nights I prayed for this?" Then she shot him through the throat. Fire spread faster than intention. Walls ignited, history burned. Ruth exited with Crow at her side. Her eyes rimmed red, not from smoke, but from something colder. Clean. They rode out at sunrise. Elsie asleep, in Wade's saddle. Ruth walking beside the mare. No one followed. The mine burned until nothing remained. A week later, in a riverside clearing, Ruth gave Elsie a strip of leather and taught her to braid it into the ribbon she'd lost. Wade watched from afar. He didn't speak. He knew the war was changing. It wasn't just vengeance anymore. It was protecting a future. Summer came dry and relentless. Rivers shrank. Hills went silently mute. Ruth weighed, and Elsie moved like echoes across worn land, sleeping in barns and overgrown way stations beneath trees, still pocked with bullet holes from wars no one spoke of. Elsie learned quickly, watching Ruth clean her gun, Wade mend boots with steady hands. She didn't cry, not even when fever rode them 2 days out of Grayer's Bluff. They sheltered in a root cellar. Ruth laid cooling cloths on her brow, whispering words Wade couldn't hear. Crow stayed vigilant at the entrance. On the third morning, Elsie sat up. "I dreamed I had wings," she said, voice fragile, "but I fell to the ground." "You won't," Ruth promised softly. Wade watched from the doorway. He'd carried girls smaller than Elsie out from darker places. But this one, he would never let her become lost. They reached Hollow Creek in late July, a dusty town of farmers and gravediggers. Its preacher was a one-eyed ex-smuggler who married on bread, buried for whiskey. Ruth asked him for a shovel, not for a grave, but for a box. 2 miles north, beneath a dry oak, they found it, buried by Wade the year the war ended. Inside a sealed pouch, a rusted key and a letter. She broke the seal with her thumb. The wax imprint read W.D. She read the letter and folded it slowly before holding it out. "I was promised to you," she said, signed with her father's hand. Wade took it gently, wrote on it, then dropped both letter and promise in fire. "I don't want a vow from a man who sold you," he said. Ruth looked down at her wrist, still scarred, still pale. "I don't either." They rented the cabin in Hollow Creek. Elsie slept on a cot. Wade patched the roof while Ruth tilled farmland. Colt strapped tight at her belt, a silent warning carved of iron. The land stayed still for a time. Then, one rainy night, Crow bristled at the door. Wade loaded his rifle. Outside, a silent figure raised his hands. He said his name was Marin and came from south, a man with missing girls like Ruth's. She studied him. Finally, she said, "You'll have to pay." "No coin," he replied. "Then you'll bleed alongside them." He nodded. A quiet pact sealed. Their fight continued, but it transformed. Ruth trained Elsie with galvanized rage. Flint powder, tracking in shadows. Wade spoke in low murmurs to widows, orphans, ex-soldiers, leaving signals carved in stone hollows, webs of twine and whispers. They built an underground army. The ash mark, named for the burned brand on Ruth's wrist, a symbol of what was forged in fire, and what refused to be forgotten. One evening, Ruth stood at the edge of the wheat field behind the cabin. A blood-orange sky bowed over them. Wind lay flat. Crow sat beside her, muzzle now silver. Elsie picked wildflowers at the fence's edge. Wade leaned against the porch rail, watching. "You ever wonder," Ruth asked quietly, "what would have happened if I'd stayed dead?" Wade didn't answer immediately. Then finally he said, "No." "Why not?" she pressed. "Because you didn't," he said, "and everything after is yours." Ruth looked toward the horizon again. "No," she said, "it's hers now." She nodded toward Elsie, the ribbon in her hair, the knife at her side, boots turned dusty from travel. The wind moved across the field like breath. Ruth raised her hand. Crow followed without command. Wade stepped off the porch. And Elsie, smiling small and strange, as though she glimpsed both hell and the route out, stood framed by endless land. The terrain didn't change, but those who roamed it were different now. That was enough. That was the ending Ruth chose. And she never looked back. Let me know when you'd like the next section polished.